Welcome to Novel Ideas, where we chat with local authors. I'm Carolyn Luck, and this is my co-host, Josh Brogadier.
Carol, great to be with you. And with us tonight is Michael M. Greenburg. Welcome to Novel Ideas. We're excited to have you and talk to you about this book, but also some of the other work you've done.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Let's just launch right into it for a moment. One of the books we're going to talk about tonight is This Noble Woman, which is really a crusade that you took to find out someone about history who I, maybe you, and Carol really didn't know anything about. So first question for you is, tell us a little about yourself and what you do.
So I'm a local lawyer. I have been for about 30 years, and I write nonfiction books as a kind of a side hobby, and enjoy it very much.
Tell us how you got into writing.
So I was an editor of the law review at law school, and was able to learn a bit about technical writing there, and began to realize in law school that with every reported case, there really was a human interest story lying behind it. I mean, it was hard enough in those days trying to figure out those cases without trying to turn them into some great American novel, but suffice it to say that it gave me an understanding that these types of legal cases can form the basis of some good nonfiction. So, as the years went by, I focused on a legal career, but later, I think it was 2006, I took a course at Framingham State, a history course, and I did that because I love history. I'm interested in history, and I wanted to show to my children that education is a lifelong process. In that course, we were assigned a book, and the book really was a legal case, a synopsis of a legal case that the author had very adaptly turned into a work of nonfiction. And I walked away from reading that thinking, I think I might be able to do this. And it kind of rekindled my interest in writing, and so that's when I decided to give it a try.
Okay, so your first book was The Mad Bomber of New York.
Incorrect.
The
first book
it
was Peaches and
Daddy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that and how you focused on this one first.
So, Peaches and Daddy is an odd little story. It's about it's a story of the 1920s, Manhattan millionaire, 52-year-old Edward Browning falls in love with, and marries a 16-year-old girl. Becomes tabloid fodder, really changes journalism in a very interesting way, and becomes culturally important from a journalistic point of view. But it's just an interesting, fun story. What I was looking for in that book is a story that is almost a forgotten jewel, something that people would look at and say, why haven't I heard of this? This is an interesting topic. It's something I thought I would have known about. And I think that theme carried forward through my writing career. Those are the types of topics I look for, the types of topics that are forgotten to history.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so then the second one was the court martial, or was the Mad Bomber?
The Mad Bomber of New York.
We're not in order here tonight, obviously. Thanks for keeping us straight on this one.
Reverse order there.
So the Mad Bomber of New York, you had said to me just before we started that you think that may be the one that you like best or think is the best.
Yeah, I think so. Technically, I think it's fairly well written. I really enjoyed that one. in terms of researching and putting it together. And I've always enjoyed the research part of it. And I think another commonality of all my books is that they're extensively sourced. So there's a roadmap at the end of the book that tells you where each and every quote or item of information comes from, so that a researcher can take these books and use them as a tool. But the Mad Bomber was really about a 1940s and 1950s terrorist. He was a gentle man from Connecticut who lived with his two spinster sisters, who unfortunately suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, and it led him to do these types of things, planting pipe bombs all around, the populous cities of areas of New York City, and it led to the first use of criminal profiling in the United States, which was really the cultural significance of the story.
Mm-hmm. So Paul Revere takes us way back to the last century. So.
Right, but again, the common thread here is stories that people generally had not heard of. I would venture to say that most people did not know that Paul Revere had a military career, and that it was pretty much of a failure.
Yeah.
The story of the court-martial of Paul Revere was based upon his experiences at the Penobscot expedition, which was a failed military exercise where a British fort that was erected in Maine had to be removed by Massachusetts forces. Paul Revere was the artillery commander of that expedition, and the mission failed miserably. They lost an entire armada of Massachusetts. They lost the entire Navy. There were like 30 ships that were lost to 6 British frigates. It was a disaster. Paul Revere did not exactly come out of that in good standing, and he was dismissed from his command at Castle Island at the time. He was committed to house arrest, and he spent the next 3 years trying to clear his name against the charges that were brought.
Yeah, I love that you have these little known aspects of history that come to life. That's terrific.
Right.
We ask authors all the time about their writing process, kind of how they go about their business. And typically, if we're talking to novelists, they just might be with themselves and their laptop or their pen and paper, whatever it is, in a little nook of their home or a coffee shop. But you're doing extensive research in all this. Where do you go, and how do you find out all this information?
Well, first of all, as you said, the process of writing nonfiction is dramatically different, and publishing nonfiction, dramatically different than fiction. With nonfiction, all you need to do is put together a book proposal and a couple of chapters, and that's enough to sell to a publisher. They'll take that, analyze it, determine if it's it's a writing style that they're interested in and a topic they're interested in, and they'll buy the book before it's written. But the process of writing the book proposal requires the author to do extensive research, because you have to have a roadmap done. You really need a chapter outline. You need, as I said, several chapters written. So you have to know where you're going with the book. In terms of writing these stories, a lot of the research gets done at that stage. However, the way I personally do it, and I write from chapter 1 or prologue through the end. I don't jump around. I do it chronologically, or I do it in the order that the book is going to be created. I follow my chapter outline, and I do a lot of that research, kind of filling in the skin and bones of the book as I go along.
Well,
And essentially, I have files on my floor representing each chapter of the book, and where all the research goes into those particular files. And so staying organized is critical to a writer, certainly for me, for my writing style. And if you're not, you spend hours looking for one piece of information that you know is there, but to try to find it is the key. So you got to stay organized.
So do you have an office at home that you do this in?
I do. I wrote The Mad Bomber at home. The rest of my books I wrote in my office. It's quiet. The phones aren't ringing generally or I'll disconnect them. And I have a little bit more control over things rather than at home.
Nice.
Yeah.
I would imagine as a lawyer, you're looking with a very critical eye to everything that you're seeing, and when you're sourcing things, that's extremely important. We'll talk about Myrtilla in a little while and how primary sources are obviously critical to what's going on and what we're learning about. Does that go with your personality as an attorney to really kind of look everything over with, as they say, a fine-tooth comb?
Yeah, I think it goes with my personality, period. It just, not necessarily as an attorney. I hope and I think that I bring that kind of detailed approach to my work, but that's kind of the way I'm comfortable doing work in a regimented, detailed fashion. And it's, people do take note that my books are well sourced, and that's not an accident. I enjoy the research. I'm one of those strange people that actually, I'm at home in a library, and now most of that library work is done online, fortunately. But it's something I really enjoy doing, and it's critical to writing, especially nonfiction. Or historical nonfiction or historical fiction, where you need to get time and place and situation accurate. If you don't have your facts, the process will take a lot longer than you might anticipate.
Oh, this is awesome. Well, I think we'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll delve into Myrtilla.
All right, welcome back to Novel Ideas. Our guest this evening is Michael Greenburg, and we're going to talk about his book, This Noble Woman Now. And the first question I want to ask you about her, specifically Myrtilla Minor, she's a character that is a lot of different things throughout her life, yet she does have this passion to help educate African American children. Take us from there about who is Myrtilla Minor, because I suspect most people who are watching this do not know the answer to that.
So Myrtilla Minor is a white farmer's daughter from upstate New York who refused to conform to the standards of the day when it came to what women did. In the 1830s, well, she was born, I think, in 1819, but by the 1820s and 1830s, she had already developed this feminist conviction that very early on led to just a general conviction of equality, and it led her to come to the conclusion, as many others had at the time, that slavery was simply an unacceptable institution and a shameful institution of the United States. And Myrtilla Minor decided that her best attack on slavery was through education.
Well, she also started out just with, well, the 1800s equivalent of the women's lib movement.
That's right.
And she herself refused to be pigeonholed into where she was supposed to go, and her father really disagreed with this.
That's right.
Tell us a little more about kind of who she was coming up and how she ended up going into teaching in the first place.
Right. So, again, at the time, society was telling women that their place was in the home, and women generally accepted that. That there was a line of thinking that education was simply not an important aspiration for women. Unfortunately, Myrtilla's father agreed with that with that idea and did not give her any encouragement when it came to furthering her own education or that of others. Fortunately, she had a strong enough personal conviction to move away from that family constraint, and she was not going to be a homemaker, and she knew early on that there wasn't a chance that she was going to be married, though she was definitely involved with men, and she enjoyed the company of men. She just didn't see marriage as something that was going to be useful in her life, because her overall objective was to further her own education and ultimately the education of African Americans.
And as with many people through history who've accomplished so much, I think persistence is certainly one of her greatest strengths in this case, and almost maybe her greatest downfall as well, as she was trying to knock on doors. And Washington, D.C. at the time, I'm reminded that that was the South. And so she was trying to start this school for African American girls in the South. We're not talking about doing this in Philadelphia or Boston or somewhere else like that. Talk a little bit about the challenges she faced as she tried to get this started.
Right. So she went locally in New York first, where she lived, upstate New York, trying to garner some interest. And she went to the abolitionists of the day and expressed her desire to have this idea of educating African Americans. The mindset amongst people like Gerrit Smith and other staunch abolitionists of the day was that anything short of an immediate emancipation of slaves was just not in the cards for them. And she advocated more of a gradual approach, that the South would never be amenable to any type of immediate emancipation of slaves. She knew it would lead to war. So as a result, she thought if she could educate these people, generally freed African Americans, they could then, in their own communities, move forward and re-educate their own people and their own communities and their own families. So, yeah, she was getting no encouragement, even from people like Frederick Douglass, who she went to, and she pleaded for his advice and his help, and people uniformly thought that she was engaging in a reckless and just a plan that was destined for failure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, especially when she went to Mississippi. I was shocked that she spent 2 years in Mississippi and ended up throwing her hands up.
Exactly. I mean, it was there that she realized that her life work had to involve the education of African Americans, because she had witnessed firsthand the horrors of slavery. She had been working in Providence for a while, just to backtrack, and she had learned of this opportunity in Mississippi. And she decided to take the job. She met the owner of the school, who was a wonderful scientist, but he was also a slaveholder. He owned a plantation, and he preached Christian values and required that his teachers have high moral standing. And she couldn't reconcile this the hypocrisy of a slaveholder requiring her and her students to have high moral standards.
Yeah.
It just didn't.
Well, you clearly see the conflict. I mean, it's pretty amazing.
Right, and that conflict ultimately made her ill, made her physically ill. And after several years, she had developed a wonderful relationship with the owner of that plantation, because she found out, though he was a slaveholder, he was also against slavery to the extent that a southern plantation owner could be, because you have to recognize that the culture at the time in the South was that their economic engine was slave labor.
Right.
So she left the South near death. She was sick, and later on her experience played a very important inspirational role in deciding to actually move down to Washington, D.C. and create that school.
Yeah.
And so much of her life is a challenge of both emotional and physical health. When you consider all that she's accomplished, even in spite of that, so she was sick from the time she was a child, right?
That's right. Right. She fought tuberculosis that was untreated for much of her life. She had a spinal infection in childhood that really never healed, and so she had periods of her life where she was physically ailing, unable to work, and she also had parts of her personality that were just argumentative, combative. She was not an easy person to get along with. She was very impatient in the way that she approached her goals and her objectives, and anybody that stood in her way, or perhaps voiced some reasoned thought in what her objectives are and what how to achieve them, she viewed as somebody who was in her way, and as a result, she alienated a lot of people, and her anger oftentimes welled up. She couldn't control her actions sometimes, and she knew it. She understood her shortcomings, but she really wasn't able to control a lot of these emotions, and as a result, she became her own worst enemy at times.
You seem to really know Myrtilla like she was a good friend of yours or something, like you lived in her place and time. How did you first discover Myrtilla to write about her?
So I thought my previous books were educational, interesting, informative perhaps, and I was trying to find something more inspirational. I wanted to write about somebody, especially with a young adult book, as this book is, who would be, teach people something on an emotional level and inspire them to good things. And so, I felt that Myrtilla kind of fit that bill. I was searching abolitionists, and I stumbled on her, and she also, her story also, in keeping with my other books, she was relatively unknown. There'd really been nothing written about her since, the 19th century, and in terms of actual full-length nonfiction books. And I thought it would be a worthwhile topic to look into, and fortunately the publisher agreed.
Wow.
And we think so as well. And this is perfect for a middle school or even early high school, an addendum to any kind of social studies instruction, and to find out who she was. I wish we had more time. We thank you so much for being here with us tonight, Michael Greenburg, and your book, This Noble Woman.
Thank you very much.
It's really a pleasure.
Oh, thank you, Michael. Yeah, this has been amazing. And thank you, Josh,
of course,
for being, as always, my awesome co-host.
Glad to be here.
And thanks to all the folks here on the staff at Access Framingham who make this show possible. And to our viewers, I say thanks, and come join us next time.
Good night.